If you're just going to the gym and winging it, you're not really training, you're just working out. And even if you've got sets and reps and exercises, if you don't actually have a plan, you're still not training. Training involves having a goal, and having a goal means you have a plan for progress. It means there's a predetermined state that you're trying to get to, and you've designed your program to achieve that goal. And for me, that's why I go to the gym. I don't just want to wing it, I don't just want to play, I want to accomplish something. And you say, sure, that's fine, whatever. I'm just trying to get jacked. What do I need a plan for? Well, maybe that's good for you. Some people are really good at pushing themselves. Maybe you've got that kind of grit and that resilience, and that lets you push through every workout. But most people aren't like that. If we look to the scientific literature, there are tons of studies that demonstrate that people overestimate their own abilities and underestimate how far from failure they are when they're training. The truth is, people just don't really know how to work hard. It's a skill, you can learn it, but it requires training. And we don't need science to tell us this. Just go to basically any gym ever, and you'll see the same people lifting the same weights week after week after week. If you want to stop wasting your time working out and you want to start training, listen up. The secret to training is having a progression model. And I'm going to detail tons of different strategies for you so you can ensure you're making progress in the gym every time you go in. The simplest and most basic progression model is a linear model where you take a fixed number of sets and reps and you simply add weight each session. Probably the most famous example of this is something like starting strength. For starting strength, you do squats, bench, rows, overhead press, and deadlift. With the exception of the deadlift, you do a 3x5 every session and add weight each time. This may sound simple, this may sound too easy, but I'll tell you, for trainees that do the starting strength program and run it into the ground, they achieve incredible results. When I began training, I did a program that was similar to starting strength. I started out with the empty bar for squats, and I did 5 sets of 5. That's 45 pounds. By the time I finished the program, I was doing something like 255 for 5 sets of 5. It took about a year of consistent, slow, iterative progress, and I was transformed. Linear progression works. Adding weight works. Now, of course, you can also add reps. Adding reps can be really effective, and there's 3 scenarios in which I actually think it might be more effective than adding weight. 1, adding reps can be really useful when you're just limited by equipment. If you're working in a home gym and you can't just add plates and plates, adding reps can be particularly useful. Secondly, if you're working with an exercise like dumbbell lateral raises, you can't just add weight every time. It's too difficult, so adding reps is a good answer. Now, lastly, adding reps can be particularly useful if you've started a program and you're just lifting heavier than you'd actually like. So you keep the weight the same, add reps slowly over time, and eventually end up in the rep range that you actually want to be at. Now, of course, adding reps does have some disadvantages in comparison to adding weight. For one, once the reps get really high, it can be very difficult to standardize your form to ensure you're actually making progress. So let's say your PR is 15 reps and eventually you make it to 20. It can be hard to determine whether that's actually a real PR because maybe you shifted your form slightly, maybe you rushed the reps, and because there's so many reps, those slight deviations really make a big difference, and so you might not be making the progress that you think you are. And secondly, one of the issues with adding reps is that your body gets really accustomed or habituated to that weight. You're training your nervous system, and because the stimulus is so similar, I actually think you're becoming a little bit less robust over time. And if and when you do add weight, you'll find that your reps will drop precipitously. And so that's one of the limitations of just adding reps. However, as I said, adding weight works, adding reps work. However, these strategies are best suited for beginners, for novices, for people who can set foot in the gym and make instant, immediate progress. For most of you listening to this video, you've probably been training for, at least 6-12 months, and you're going to need something a little bit more involved. I like to refer to all of the next progression models as 1 step back, 2 steps forward. That's the key here. You can't make progress infinitely and indefinitely. You have to introduce some degree of pulsatility, where you take a step back so you can take 2 steps forward. You make things easier so that they can get harder once more. Perhaps the most famous or the most widely used progression model like this is the double progression model. Let me give you an example to explain it best. So you're doing dumbbell bench press. You're going to do 3 sets for 8 to 12 reps. The first time you perform this movement, let's say you use 50-pound dumbbells. You get 12 reps for the first set, then you get 10 and 9. So you can't get 12 reps across all sets. So you stick with the same weight. You stick with that 50 pounds until you can do 12, 12, and 12. Once you get 12 reps across all sets, you can add weight, and then you go back down again to the bottom of the rep range, probably 8 reps again. So again, that's taking 1 step back to take 2 steps forward. This model can be really effective and people milk it for a long time. Some people train this way for their entire bodybuilding career and make great gains. It can be very effective. Another twist on this idea, this 1 step back, 2 steps forward, is this notion of fixed reps across sets. So let's say you're doing the leg press. Your goal is to get 50 cumulative reps across 3 sets. So you load up 4 plates on the leg press. The first one you get 15, then 12 and 11 reps. Then you stay at that weight for each subsequent session until you can get 50 cumulative reps across all 3 sets. Once you do so, you add weight and repeat the process. I really like this for simpler movements where you can just bang out the reps and not have to think about it. This 1 step back, 2 steps forward model is similar to the concept of linear periodization that's often used in powerlifting. Linear periodization actually used to be more popular in the pre-internet days, like the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s. It's kind of lost some of its luster because it's really not as effective as it was once thought to be, but I think it's useful to explain it to you here because it's demonstrative of this concept I'm trying to explain. So with linear periodization, you essentially do a pyramid. For your first couple weeks, you do sets of 10. Then sets of 8, then sets of 5, then 3, 2, eventually leading up to a new 1 rep max, a new PR. Then you repeat again, starting back with 10s, but at a higher weight. And this can be really effective. You can build strength and muscle training under this paradigm. The problem is it's just not really ideal for powerlifting or for bodybuilding. So for powerlifting, the problem is that those sets of 10 and 8, they're just not very specific. There's not a ton of carryover between a set of 8 and a 1 rep max. So you're kind of wasting your time in those initial weeks. And then for bodybuilding, there's really no reason to ever do sets of 3 and 2 and 1 because the goal is to build muscle and not strength. So linear periodization is kind of the worst of both worlds. It's not going to give you precisely what you want. And because of that, a lot of modern day powerlifters have really moved away from linear periodization. They tend to do static singles throughout the year, and they do more of their hypertrophy work with machines or other low fatigue movements. But again, I'm explaining this to you now because I think it's useful conceptually because it helps to capture this 1 step back, 2 steps forward model. Finally, I'm going to give you 2 other less common progression models just to get your brain going. The first is shortened rest periods or density training. So let's say you're doing a 5x5 on bench. You're doing 225 for 5 sets of 5. The first week you do it, you rest 5 minutes between each set. Then, with each subsequent session, you reduce that rest time slightly, maybe by a minute, until you get to about 1 to 2 minutes rest time per set. At that point, you add weight, increase the rest times, and repeat. Again, 1 step back to take 2 steps forward. I really like this progression model. I think it's kind of fun and exciting and it keeps you working. And also because you're playing with time, it ensures that your workouts never get too long. Lastly, the final quirky model I want to introduce is progressive range of motion training. This is most frequently applied with the deadlift, but you can do it with other things. So if we take the deadlifts, you start with something like an above the knee rack pull, a very short range of motion deadlift. As the weeks go on, you slowly increase the range of motion until eventually you're pulling from the floor and doing a standard conventional deadlift. Now, this isn't always the most effective way to train because an above the knee rack pull doesn't tend to have a lot of carryover to the deadlift, but some people have had significant success with this method. I think this training works best when you start actually with a below the knee rack pull, so you're not doing quite as much change from your first weeks to your last weeks. This is kind of similar to the challenge I articulated with linear periodization. You just want to make sure that there's always carryover to your goal, because again, the purpose of training is to achieve a goal. But regardless of the limitations of that model or any of the other models I've talked about, I think you can apply these ideas to your own training and come up with new, novel, exciting ways to make progress. Thanks for watching. Have you tried any of these progression models before? How do they work for you? Let me know in the comments.